Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Cream. It's season 5. Yes, season 5. And I'm back with my first sit down interview for this season. And I'm really excited to have Mr. Soul be that guest. And I think that you're going to enjoy this. Actually, I don't want to say I know that you're going to enjoy this interview. So sit back, relax, get whatever it is that you like to drink or smoke or whatever you partake in. And get ready for this interview or conversation. You guys know I like to call them conversations, but my name is Cream, aka Ms. Cream of the Crop. You should have known that already. Let's get into this interview / conversation. Mr. Soul, thank you so much for coming and sitting down for this conversation with me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you
You're
for
welcome.
the
So
invite.
before we get to the conversation, I always like to do an "Are you okay?" check. You have to be honest. How are you? How are things mentally, spiritually, physically? How do you feel today?
I feel good today.
Okay.
The honest answer to that is I just lost a cousin on Tuesday, a close cousin in Chicago. So, it's my cousin's mom, which is also my cousin, but he's a close cousin. And I kind of feel the impact of that. So I feel good that my cousins, the other cousins, are kind of rallying behind him for support. Um, and outside of that, I'm just processing life daily like we all have to. I wouldn't say anything I'm going through or dealing with is any indifferent to what, the world is experiencing. So I'm grateful.
Absolutely. Even if we're going through something or living through something that someone else has experienced, we still have the right to feel our feelings
Oh yeah.
individually. We don't have to dismiss how you feel because someone else might have gone through it too.
Oh, that's true. That's fair. That's fair. Well, I kind of share without going into super
Yeah.
depths that is a impactful loss. The irony of it is that tomorrow, right, is my father's birthday, and 2 days after my father's birthday in 2016, on October 6th, my father passed away. So October has always been an emotional month for me to process. I moved back to Cleveland in October, so a lot happened in October.
Yeah.
So it's it's interesting.
It's a challenging, interesting month.
It's a
for
lot
you.
to navigate.
Yeah, I can understand. Well, I really appreciate you even more now for coming and having this conversation with me in October. Hopefully, this will be a positive addition to your month of October. So
I think so.
next year, you'll say, well, here's all the things that normally happens in October. And I had this great conversation with Cream
right
last year.
I can say that.
So maybe we can make that a tradition to keep this positive, at least this positive piece in October.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. That's also the reason why I came. Is like, I know that there's some value to come from this that elevates the spirit.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. And just speaking about, as you said, going through something that isn't any different than what anyone else in the world is navigating through. This has been a heavy year of grieving, especially these last couple of months. Because I think I shared with you back in July that we lost some people that were close to us. And then last week, a friend of mine passed away. So it's been a lot of grieving happening like back to back.
I think for me,
2024.
Well, for me, it's really been the past 8 years of my life. Like I'm up to about 15, 16 close people in those 8 years that I've lost. Like, I lost all the uncles in my family, so no more uncles, no more male elders in the family.
Yeah.
My grandmother in that time frame. Obviously, my father was the catalyst to it. Two of my best friends, one here, one in Atlanta. So yeah, I definitely feel like and a good friend of mine in a conversation, somebody that I confide in and I vent with, he posed a challenge, and his challenge was that, in all that you're going through, where does that go?
Yeah.
And he was like, it can't just go into artwork. It can't just go. So
I'm glad you said that. Before you get into whatever you told him, I think the conversation that we're going to have today, and I didn't know, just so you all know, like this isn't something that I knew we were going to talk about today, but to me, it's just, I don't want to say weird, but um, I don't know. I'm someone that's somewhat of an empath, so I can just feel things. So when I sat down and thought about what I wanted to have a conversation with you about, having your friend ask you that question, I think what we're going to talk about today um, will probably remind you of that conversation,
Okay.
and it might pull some of the things out that you talk to your friend about in that conversation, because the meat of this conversation is going to be about your motivation and your inspiration,
Mm-hmm.
and your creative process. So
Okay.
um, before we get to that, when you were talking about off camera, how you realized at some point that you hadn't grieved yet when you lost your father. This last to one of the people that passed away was my son's best friend, who was like a son to me, and my nephew passed like a week or two right after that,
Mm.
and neither one of them were sick.
Mm.
So it was very hard for us to deal with, and I think that a lot of us in our family are still grieving that, and
Sure.
taking the time out to actually having that happen back to back suddenly, and it was two younger folks that I really cared about. um I realized uh that I hadn't grieved any other family members passing, because I actually grieved this time, and it didn't, I don't know, it was just like the weirdest thing for me,
Mm-hmm.
but it was the best thing for me because it allowed me to grieve everyone else. 'Cause I lost
Okay.
my father the month before I turned 9.
Mm.
um and that was also the same year that I lost my grandmother. And fast forward, during COVID, I lost one of my really good friends to COVID, and I realized I never grieved her
Oh yeah.
passing. So it was just, it just made me think about, my great uncle passed away, I think like 2 years ago. It was just so many passings, and I just realized that I was just busy.
Yeah, I can definitely say in transparency, based off of that conversation, that I have not. It's just been really too many back to back. Like I said, when I first came home, I put that energy into something else that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately contributed to more stress in my life,
Yeah.
for good cause, but it ultimately still produced more stress.
Yeah.
So, like I said, like, over the past 8 years since being back home in Cleveland, like I've lost more people in 8 years back here than I did in 20 years living in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So the impact of that, uh, these are people that are close to me. These
Hmm.
aren't just like, these are people that I've had personal relationships with. I think I've gotten to a spot place in some of those instances where it's just too numb to mourn, to
Yeah.
understand what to do or how to process it. Just wanting to be whatever type of vessel I can be for the person who I'm supporting at the time,
Mm-hmm.
based off of the type of support I got when my father passed away or my grandmother passed away. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't think that over 8 years, I won't even say I don't think, in transparency, I have not placed that.
Yeah.
And art has always been a vehicle of escape for most of us who have creative capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but in that conversation with my friend, he himself having gone through some things, we kind of agreed that art isn't the it's not the only vessel when you lose certain types of people
Yeah.
or a certain amount of people or whatever the impact may be.
Yeah.
The continuation of that grief, sometimes your emotions and energy just go on autopilot,
Yeah. Absolutely.
and
And
so
I think that, and that something that I had to tell myself, and then I started making some content, but I really just took myself off of social media to just be in solitude. But I wanted to encourage everyone to just understand that grieving looks different for everyone.
definitely.
And I think that when your grief doesn't look the way that you think it's supposed to look, or someone else's grief looks, or movies and TV, then you start feeling guilty about not grieving the way that you're supposed to grieve. But during this last couple of months, I just realized that grieving and grief looks different for everyone, and everyone handles grief differently, and that is okay.
Yeah, I think for myself that um, this is probably the first time for anybody watching this interview that they will know that I have experienced that much grief or
Hmm.
am still processing all of it as
Yeah.
fresh as Tuesday.
Yeah. And it doesn't go away. I think we expect, it's like, okay, like the my son's friend and my nephew passed away in July.
mhm.
And when my nephew passed, it was like that Monday, and I had two events, huge events to do that Saturday. So I just
You
worked.
just
I
go do
just
what you got
did
to
what I
do.
had to do, and no
Yeah.
one knew. But
I,
and you expected to, you're like, okay, it's August now. You should be done. But I wasn't done. It's like, okay, it's September now. You should be
mhm.
done. And I wasn't done. And so I had to tell myself, like, grieving looks different. And then that's when I realized that I was grieving for everybody that
Yeah.
had passed. My, my grandfather, my everyone. And I was just like, this is heavier than it's ever felt before.
And then for me, like, let's take my best friend. He was killed here, January 2021, and so for me, that grief is rehashed in my travel throughout Cleveland. I can't go anywhere in Cleveland without crossing the pathway where I have a memory of him
Yeah,
in those places. Like,
yeah,
and that's a lot all into Warrensville and around. So, you know, the grief for me, it never goes away. what
right.
what happens is that you learn to internalize it better. Some people get, you know, mental help or
Yeah, grief
therapy,
counseling.
grief
Yeah,
counseling. Some people just wear it. Some people put it into work. Some people, go to the extreme of harming themselves
yeah,
behind it. So like you said, it doesn't look the same.
yeah,
But I definitely know my personal experience. Like, every October for the past 8 years, I'm reminded that my father passed away 2 days after I spoke to him for 2 hours for his 69th birthday.
yeah,
So and not expected, and having a ticket to come home October 9th because my mother was having surgery October 13th.
yeah,
So the trajectory of that was just crazy.
yeah.
And so every year it's like a movie, but it's like watching Boys in the Hood for the
Mm-hmm.
80th time. It's
Yeah,
like you're not as surprised at this
yeah,
scene as you were before. You know
yeah,
the dialogue, so you learn how to better cope with it.
yeah.
But based off of those relationships, the grief doesn't go
It
away.
never goes away.
Yeah,
And I just, for anyone that's listening or watching, I just want them to understand that it's okay if it doesn't go away, and it's okay to
that's
get
right.
grief counseling. But you want to do things, you want to do the most positive things that you can do to help you live through the grief. Because I know, like you said, sometimes people can choose things that aren't so positive for themselves,
Hmm.
but you have to do what you need to do in order to continue to live for
That's right.
yourself and others that are still here. So, still grieving and still living through the grief is okay, but make sure it's a positive living through the grief.
Agreed. Agreed.
So, we're going to leave you with that and move into the rest of our conversation. So, as I said, I think that some of this conversation that we're going to have today will tie back to what we just talked about and how we're really feeling in our lives. So, I just want to start with motivation. So, you've been a visual artist for some time now, and I know that having inspiration and motivation and being in this space for a while can sometimes be challenging to continue to be motivated.
Hmm.
So I just want to give everyone the definition of motivation because we're also going to talk about inspiration. And I think those are two words that people get confused and don't realize that motivation and inspiration are two different things.
That's correct.
So let's get into the definition of inspiration. So we're going to start out with your inspiration. So inspiration is defined as something that makes someone want to do something or gives them an idea about what to do or create. It is also defined as a force or influence that inspires someone, the act of being mentally stimulated to do something, especially to do something creative.
Hmm.
So this is a two-part question. Where do you find your inspiration? And other than creating, what's your favorite creative outlet? So that's what I was saying when your friend was like, we got to do something other than art. I'm like, that kind of
Right.
ties into what I want to ask.
Where do I find my inspiration?
Yeah.
I'm inspired by people who think, act, and move in the capacity that I desire. Because to me, that sets a bar. Inspiration has to come for me from a high frequency. someone at that level or higher to push me, to motivate me to achieve whatever that goal is. You know, so that could be in various forms. Music, I spend 99.999% of my day just listening to music.
Mm-hmm.
And I listen to a large range of things from Marvin Gaye to Future to Alabama Shakes to Little Dragon and all across the board, Parliament Funkadelic. Um, obviously, I'm going to be inspired by other visual artists, and that's photographers, painters, graphic designers, illustrators, because I see levels of work or execution or technique that inspire me to push my envelope a little further. And I'm inspired by truth and truth seekers, people who are not, afraid to, sacrifice popularity, sacrifice, you know, things that hold people back from standing on their truth, and that truth existing in every room that you go in, not just some rooms. I'm
Absolutely.
inspired by that because I look at, you know, the other aspect of inspiration for me are, some of the social political leaders that I revere, and I look at the amount of sacrifice that they placed into being activists for the things that they would live and die for. Many of them dying, many of them spending a large amount of time incarcerated because of that. That's inspirational to me because we have the luxury to do a lot of different things that really a lot of us are doing that don't amount to shit, to be quite honest. And so I'm inspired by people who have the notion to sacrifice life and freedom to move on the behalf of other people. I think that's something I can draw from as an artist and put into my life. So those are some of the sources of inspiration: music, conversation, historical reference, people. And then the second part, would reiterate
Other
that other
other than creating, what is your favorite creative outlet?
other than
What
well,
you
other than
what you're doing?
art.
Yeah.
Well,
Other than visual art.
other than visual art. Oh, that's a good question because you know, I just had this conversation yesterday with a lady that I had met, and I informed her that I was a multidisciplinary artist and that my mentor taught us to use and enforce really the utilization of all the tools. So if I'm bored with painting murals, then I have acrylic paint to play in. If I'm bored with the acrylic paint, I understand all the digital mediums. If I'm tired of digital mediums, then I can combine them all. So I don't know if there's a creative thing that I do outside of visual art. Like currently, right now, I'm animating using software on my iPad, and I'm extremely drawn to that. So for myself, creativity is so deeply embedded that I don't know where to come from or what else to tap into because I don't sing,
Right.
I don't dance other than my
You don't
my
even
cool
sing in the shower?
my gangster boogie. I sing in the car,
In the
but
car?
as far as being like creative outlets,
Yeah.
it's all centered around art for me. That's just my life. That's my life path, passion, and purpose.
Yeah.
You know.
I like that. So you talked about your life path and purpose. You also talked about those that inspire you. And your name is Mr. Soul. So how did you get the name Mr. Soul?
So upon returning back to Cleveland in '94 from the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, where I graduated, I started hit the ground running as an entrepreneur doing artwork and design for the local underground hip hop scene here at the time. And that led me to an old school OG DJ. His name was DJ Centipede. So at the time, the name of my company was Visual Soul.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I would meet him for projects, I used to do these mixed master massacre battle flyers
Mm-hmm.
for him. He would always greet me as Mr. Soul as a way of greeting me as a person and the business.
Yeah.
And I thought it was dope, but I never really thought much of it. Flash forward, so this is around 95, 96,
Mm-hmm.
97 ish. Flash forward to 97, I'm in Atlanta for about a year at this time, and I started working with a renowned studio, Patchwork Recording Studios. And my uh, then client, current client, brother, BJ used to greet me as Mr. Soul as well. And at that point, I decided that it was something that I would own, that it was not pure coincidence that two people from two different walks of life, from two different cities and two different places identified, this. But the
It fits you. It's very
well, it
fitting.
comes from the work, and it
Yeah.
was intentional because at a certain point, 94 to be exact, the world was introduced to Outkast, and it had a different level of impact on me in that I was enamored by this sound that Organized Noise created around this group,
Hmm.
and then the ideology of what the group represented, operating under the crooked American system too long, is the backronym for Outkast. And so I, at that moment, what I got from the music was soul, was gospel, was hip hop, it was funk, it was jazz, it was all of the elements of black music, and it was movement, and it was vibrant, and it was purposeful. And in that moment, I decided that's what my work needed to look like. I wanted my work to fit what that music sounded like. And so from that point on is kind of like how the work embodied the name, because the name embodied the work.
Absolutely.
But it was
Absolutely. I
the
can't
cool
see
thing,
you
it
as
wasn't
anybody
chosen.
else but Mr. Soul. Like,
Yeah,
you are soul to me. Like that. I don't know how else to explain it.
yeah.
It fits.
I'm this art imitating life, life
Absolutely.
imitating art, however you want to
Absolutely.
flip it.
I love how that name came to you.
Mm,
As you said, two people from two different areas
yeah,
called you Mr. Soul, and
yeah.
I really couldn't see you as anything else.
And I stamped it. I spent 20 years in Atlanta, and that's my name in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my name. That's my name here. But I
Yeah.
spent 20 years building a brand around not just the work, but who I am as an individual, what I
Hmm.
stand on, what I represent. People know me for a lot more than just doing art in Atlanta,
Right.
because, 2 decades of my life, intense decades of my life, were spent there. And under that name, I became a man at the age of 22 to, 42 when I
Hmm.
moved back home. So yeah,
Okay.
definitely, I stamped it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely it's definitely you. It's definitely embedded through
Thank you.
everything that you do and how you carry yourself. As I said, I couldn't see you be anything else but soul.
I appreciate that.
So
Yeah.
they knew what they were doing
We
when they
might,
called you
yeah, yeah, they did. They did.
that.
The universe was right.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so you worked at Patchwork, you went to Patchwork Studios. Just off the record, I've done a couple interviews at Patchwork
Okay.
Studios.
Yeah, Patchwork is, I don't lost count. Patchwork is maybe like 29 years old or something, like
Yeah,
however many years old it is.
yeah.
I'm 28
Okay.
in. So I
Wow.
started working with Patchwork in 97,
Hmm.
when it was a small house. And then in 2002, it became what is now the $4 million plus recording studio that everybody records out of.
Yeah, all those plaques on the wall are very motivating.
And so yeah, like Patchwork is like family. Like Curtis Daniel, who's one of the co-owners, BJ Kerr, who was the person who was at the time, he was the president of a record label,
Hmm.
and in '97, the record Patchwork label had Razcast. Everybody knows Razcast.
Yeah,
And Razcast was from Carson, California. So was Bob Whitfield, who was the owner of the label, owner of the studio at the time, and Curtis Daniel, who was the president at the time of the studio. And so, from that point up until really the time that I left, I did all of their graphics. I
oh
did
wow.
all the design. I was so connected to that brand that when the studio was rebuilt, Curtis built offices in the basement
Mm-hmm.
specifically for me to be able to work out of, and I did that for maybe about 2 years until I started to gravitate back to the fine arts community.
Yeah.
But yeah, Curtis Daniel, B.J. Kerr, and Oz, Toya. There's a whole lot of people that are in that family
Hmm.
that I became a part of, and it's dope. And Patchwork, if you're into music, if you're into sonically superior music, which is the tagline for Patchwork, then you would know that that's a place that you want to record in the country,
Absolutely.
not just in Atlanta. Like
Absolutely.
Whitney Houston, George Clinton, Jeezy, Dr. Dre, T.I., Jesus, Farrakhan, like you
Everyone.
name everybody.
Yes. That's why I
I
was
don't know if
really
Jesus was there. I was
no.
just saying
If Jesus is with you, he was there.
he was there.
He was
Bam.
there.
But everybody has recorded at Patchwork. And so
Yeah.
for me, I'm real big on relationships, and
Hmm.
relationships is a thing that I struggle with here in Cleveland because these are two different ideologies in terms of how things work. But Patchwork is a 28-year relationship.
Hmm.
Like, and I ain't never fell out with Curtis. I ain't never
Right.
fell out with BJ. In
Yeah.
30 years, I still do business with these people.
Yeah.
So it's bigger than just the studio and the brand. It's the relationships that to this day. And then I can't say Patchwork without mentioning, one of the people that I lost that I'm speaking to is my brother Clay Evans.
Yeah.
Clay Evans was a very instrumental part of Patchwork when I moved there and when I met him. And Clay, sidebar, is also from Cleveland.
Hmm.
But Clay was Don the OG in the industry because Clay knew everybody.
Right.
So you can go on Clay's page and you can see him with Drake, with Snoop. He was Tip's road manager. He was Lil Duval's manager before he passed away.
Hmm.
So he had his hands in a lot over those years up until he passed away. So every time Lil Duval came to Cleveland, I always had tickets because
Right.
Clay is like, I got tickets for you.
Right.
When Lil Duval had his accident and then he had Tip on the road, I got Tip here, and this was the first time I actually got to hung out with Clay
Yeah.
because he typically I would miss him when he would come to the city.
Yeah.
So those types of relationships came from that studio, and I value that.
Yeah. It's so crazy to me when they talk about 6 degrees of separation and how you can be separated 6 degrees of separation from someone and not even realize it because it's just so funny that I never met you before.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've had the opportunity to do some things with Goody Mob.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to Patchwork Studios, one of the times I went there, there were some artists that flew in from the UK, and there was the producer that does a lot of work for a couple artists. If I don't want to name them right now, but he produced a couple of their well, we'll talk about Bryson Tiller, but he produced most of Bryson Tiller's work,
Okay.
and they are from Nashville, and they drove from Nashville because they knew I was going to be at Patchwork Studios to come to do the interview with me. So, um, I just find it very, very fascinating, like what Patchwork Studios means for so many people, especially for Black people in our culture, and how it brings a lot of people together.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's a different vibe there than it is in Cleveland
Mm-hmm.
because the same opportunities and experiences that I've had in Atlanta, I'm from Cleveland. I don't get those here.
Well, it's a cultural difference,
Yes.
and when I say culture, it's a variety of different aspects of culture that I'm speaking to. The culture of community is different in Atlanta. When you
Hmm.
look at the trajectory of Atlanta and why it's been successful, Tip is on Killer Mike songs. Tip and Killer Mike got businesses together. Tip and Two Chains is on the song. Like they do music together, they do business together, they
Hmm.
fellowship together, they elevate each other.
Yeah.
Cleveland is the city where I gotta knock this nigga off for his position in order for to be seen.
They
And
act like there
so,
can't be two of us doing the same thing at the same time. And if you're doing your thing, as you said,
mhm.
I have to push you over so that I can take your spot. But
I don't think Cleveland really respects my. This is my experience because people
mm,
will blow this all out of context. But I lived in two cities, so
mm,
I've earned the right to be able to speak between the two, and I have relationships that are 30 years in. Like I knew
mm,
people before I moved to Atlanta that I
right.
still know now. Is that the culture of support is different.
Hmm.
We don't support each other here. We don't really embody the ideology of a leader. Like we'll call somebody a leader or we'll say this person's a leader, but we won't allow them to lead,
Exactly.
or we want to interject with how they lead.
Hmm.
And the culture of economics, real estate. So I mean, Atlanta is a cheat code. It's Black
Yeah.
real estate power, entertainment power,
Hmm.
sports power, political power, entrepreneurship power,
Hmm.
art power. these are grassroots. These are like seven, like it's rich in history.
Yeah.
Now, Cleveland has a very rich history too, especially when you're talking about grassroots and movement,
Yeah.
but it's suppressed, and it's suppressed for reasons we won't go into in this interview. But I also think that that shapes the Cleveland that we have now, where these things are complicit in why we don't see Cleveland on a national scale
Yeah.
in the capacity of a Detroit, a Chicago, and I won't even compare it to Atlanta, New York, or LA, because that would be unfair.
Right.
Um, so, I speak on the differences, but I think Cleveland is a beautiful place with a lot of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, as someone who left it 20 years and came back, I came back to the same, what I believe is the same mind state that I left.
Mm-hmm.
And it's challenging to have experienced growth somewhere else and progress somewhere else and be rooted in a place where that's just not respected.
Yeah.
And this is not my ideology and conversation. In the past week, I've had this conversation with 5 people
Yeah.
from Cleveland,
No.
2 of which said that they are on their way out because they feel like they've given it all that they can.
And I'm glad you said that because that's where I've been for a really long time because I just feel like I don't want to have to keep proving who I am to people. I've
That's right.
been there, done that. I don't want to just let's just leave it at that. I don't want to keep proving myself to people that I deserve to be at tables that I built.
Right.
I helped build. I probably put the legs on it,
Right.
the chairs, the tablecloth. I set it, and then every year, every turnover, it seems like you have to come back and say, "Well, let me keep posting all the stuff I did, so you know that I'm relevant." Like I don't have to do that in Atlanta. And just speaking to two of the people that you mentioned, Killer Mike, um, I got a phone call right before COVID to go to the barbershop that he had to do an interview with Kodak Lens. You know, he's the person that has the gold couch that everyone wants to sit on and take the photos and
Right.
just all the photos for Rockefeller and Rock Nation. And he was there to record a podcast episode. And when I'm in Atlanta, because I was living there part time and then here, um, it was like, hey, Cream, I know what you do, and Killer Mike's doing this, has this private podcast recording going on. You should be there.
Mm-hmm.
Go.
It's
That's what I get when I'm there.
Well, it's that simple. And then, like, you were probably at the Edgewood barbershop, but I did Killer Mike's logo for the one that's in I believe that's College Park. That's in on Roosevelt Highway, the swag
It was
shop. The one before the one on
it
Edgewood.
was the one at Edgewood.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
main one. But he had a swag shop before he opened that one. But I
Mm-hmm.
worked with Killer Mike,
And Ti too, like the first time I had like any personal interaction was when I was doing PR for the Salute the DJ award show. And he
Mm-hmm.
had some new artists that he wanted to bring out. So he knew that the award show was run by women. And he was like, whatever you guys need me to do to support, I'm gonna do it. And him, Tiny, his whole entourage, like I was in charge of him and making sure like his green room and everything was straight. And even Shawty Low, rest in peace, was gonna be there. And they both were just like, he was like, if nothing, it don't start that won't be. He was like, you be in your space, I'll be in my space. But Tib showed up, even he performed
Mm-hmm.
just on the strength of wanting to see the award show continue to succeed and making sure that his artists had a platform to perform at. There was another time where they were filming for their reality series and my daughter was with me and I had her as my little assistant and he saw that she was filming and they made everyone else leave and they were like, okay, you guys can stay, have me sign the release form so she could be in the show.
Mm-hmm.
And so he did like a mini interview with her. Like every time I've ever had any interaction with Tip, it's always been genuine. It's always been cool, and he remembers me every single time. I don't have to reintroduce myself to
I think, again, going back to culture, I think a lot of people, like, if you listen to Killer Mike speak, he's very proud and knowledgeable of his city's history, the
mm-hmm.
city's leaders, who sacrificed what, and that shapes the man that Killer Mike is. And you know, I think, again, as I said, that we've been stripped away from our history as far as Black people and
Yeah,
our history here, because it's a very, it's a volatile history. It's a rebellious history. It's a confrontational and defiant history.
yeah,
And it's an energy that doesn't exist in the capacity because I think it was starved out. And with that, there's still people here who are who have accepted the challenge to continue push Cleveland forward. And I've had the opportunity to meet and work with some of those people who don't suffer the complacency, who are willing to take the darts, being in the front of the war line, um, and trying to implement and impact change or inspire change,
Yeah,
motivate change in whatever capacity. But I ultimately I believe that it's the culture of our city, and the culture of our city is dictated by its leadership.
absolutely.
And the leadership of Cleveland has always been in question in so many different capacities. So, you know, when people, you know, I stopped comparing the cities and I just compared the experiences
Hmm.
because I understand how different these two cities are,
Hmm.
you know, and some of the opportunities that was able to accomplish. Like I wasn't even in Atlanta for a full year before I made a contact with Patchwork, and that was cold calls
Right.
because I was in the yellow pages looking up the studios that I read in all the CD liners and
Yeah.
Patchwork, Purple Ribbon, not Purple Ribbon, but can't forget the name. It was a few of them.
Mm.
Doppler. It was a couple of studios that you had that all the music was being made out of, and
Yeah.
Patchwork was the one that welcomed me in, and I was able to build relationship, family. I got keys to BJ's house, like
Yeah.
that level of friendship. So I think it's the culture. When people go to Atlanta, they're looking, especially if you're going with an idea,
Mm.
an ideology that you support, and then you attract other people to it. It's inevitable that you will find some light. And I think
Absolutely.
that's the thing.
Absolutely.
There's a network to catch you in whatever you do. When
Yeah.
I came back home, there was nothing to catch me. So I was like, I had to be a part of building something
Hmm.
that I could say, okay, this is closely related to what,
Right.
or these are aspects of what I'm familiar with
Yeah.
that I need
Yeah.
because I'm 20 years into that.
Absolutely. And just speaking on the differences in the cities you were talking about culture, I think that a lot of the history and the Black history in Cleveland has been suppressed. And it does sadden me at times to hear some people from certain neighborhoods are like, oh, there's nothing to do here, or it's so boring, or I just think that it goes back to them not really understanding the Black history in Cleveland to have something to be proud of other than just saying, I'm from Cleveland and my neighborhood is the most dangerous. I think most
Right.
people, most Black people here put their pride in how dangerous their neighborhood is instead of really understanding some of the movements that happen here for Black culture. And I think that's one of the other differences with Atlanta. As you were saying, you mentioned Killer Mike. They know the history and the importance of what Black people did to make Atlanta what it is. And I don't think that that's something that has been readily um, put forth here in Cleveland
I
to
could.
have Black people be proud. But for me, I have that history because my great aunt is someone who, and her husband is someone who was a part of building history here.
Mhm.
So I have papers, I have stories, I have photos of, JFK coming to my great uncle's church.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of history that I know about that gives me certain pride to be from Cleveland, other than just saying I'm from Cleveland.
Yeah, and then I also like it's in there's it's intention behind that.
Yes.
Killer Mike is a reflection of the Atlanta civil rights leaders that gave birth to struggle and identity for that in Atlanta. I don't believe Cleveland wants its Black community to model themselves after the types of people who were on the front lines here.
No.
Cleveland,
Cleveland has always
historically was the
modeled
first.
themselves as a white city.
Well,
I've had people come here and say, I didn't realize it was this many Black people here.
Cleveland historically, on paper, was the first city in the country where there was a confrontation between a Black power structure and the police.
Hmm.
And so, if you understand the magnitude of what that means, it's that Cleveland has always been a town where people uh, got to a point where enough was enough.
Yeah.
Twice, Glenville and Huff.
Hmm.
That's our history here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as black as Atlanta is, it don't have that history.
At all.
So, but if Killer Mike is a reflection of his leadership, the reflection of the leadership that was trying to gain equity and all of those things is different here. It's a lot more aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
So, that is intentionally suppressed. But above and beyond that, I believe that, you know, information is something that you have to desire to
To
seek.
seek. Mm-hmm.
And information or the lack of it will keep you complacent. It will keep
Absolutely.
you in a space. And I've just been exposed to so much information, just cultural information, like building relationship information, like all of this information is the digital code that makes up who Mr. Soul is. It's
Mm-hmm.
information,
Mm-hmm.
it's experiences. So like I have to remind myself that, even though I don't move in this capacity, I don't have an ego. I'm not
Right.
arrogant, but I have to remind myself that, you know, I got experiences people don't have.
Yeah.
Like I have a relationship. I have working relationships with people who are real true activists and revolutionaries.
Mm-hmm.
I have working relationships with a studio like Patchwork. I worked with the Goody Mob.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with Organized Noise. I went to Rico Waite's funeral. I, so many different experiences, and it's so many that I can't even remember until I'm just in conversation with
Yeah.
people. Like, I worked with an apparel company during the height of urban apparel when FUBU was $300 million company. I was going to the Magic Show twice a year for 4 years, working with a black-owned manufacturer, learning that. So in 2024, if you don't have that experience, I'm not better than you,
Right.
right? But I know more than you. I have more information than
Yeah.
you, and but people don't respect information.
Yeah, and I've noticed that here that the more information you have, the less valuable
The
people tend to make to the less value people tend to place on you here. It's like having information and knowing more, it makes people upset.
I be,
Here, that's been my experience, that
I could
people
say
were
mine.
actually upset with me for being intelligent, for knowing more, for running my business properly. Like when I first started my radio station, I literally had someone make a campaign to say we don't ask for EBKs. Like they were doing all the opposite and making it like it was something to brag about, that they don't require
Hmm.
you to show up as your best self like my station does.
I believe that, and then without harping on the comparison of the two cities, I think it all boils down to what I said about inspiration and what inspires me. What inspires me is my frequency or above.
Yeah.
That's the bar, nothing below.
Yeah.
And so I believe that a lot of people operate in thought process, high frequency, but in comfort, low frequency.
Yeah.
And that is not, can't just be an ideology, because while we can point to certain successes, that certain successes in Cleveland, in the past week, I had conversations with five people, five across generational ages,
Mm-hmm.
who all feel like I feel.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that nobody talks about it though. Like
Right.
we talk about certain things in silos. We talk about certain things in the comfort of spaces with people who support
Mm-hmm.
some of these bullshit ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the reality is that we don't talk about the things to push the culture forward, because I don't know, we don't have the information.
Right.
If we don't have the desire, if we don't have the testicular fortitude, whatever it may be, something is missing for me to be able to identify, well, this is how I feel based off of my
Yeah.
comparison. But I'm talking to people. Now, these five people, all five of these people have lived outside of Cleveland for
Mm-hmm.
some point period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the immediate uh, uh,
That's the game changer in seeing.
thing, understanding what it's
Yeah.
like outside, because we live in a city. You just said it.
Mm-hmm.
It's neighborhood based. When I left Cleveland, I was from Lee and Harbor, but
Right.
my work is representative of this entire city.
Mm-hmm.
Like the work that I do, the work that I put on these walls is messaging for the entire city, not just for Lee Harbor. It's
Yeah.
messaging that will fit in New York, Chicago, Portland, Oregon, Mexico City or wherever,
Yeah.
because inspiration is a universal frequency.
Absolutely. So we talked about inspiration, and we talked about that in depth in many ways. So I want to get into motivation and talk about what motivates you. But again, like inspiration, I want to give everyone a definition of motivation so they understand the difference. So um, motivation is defined as the progress that initiates, guides, and maintains goal oriented behaviors. The internal and external forces that drive individuals to take action, pursue goals, and persist in tasks. So, this is also two-part. So, the first part is what motivates you to create. I think we kind of got into that, but what motivates you to create? Like, what's your
Nowadays, necessity motivates me. Going back to inspiration, like,
yeah?
since we having a transparent conversation, I'm not really inspired here. You know, I get inspiration here, but I'm not inspired here.
I
Um,
can relate to that.
and so that makes the motivational component a little difficult. That friend that I had a conversation with, he sent me a clip this morning, and the clip was about being lonely, because we talk about being alone in our thought processes
Mm-hmm.
and in our age. I turned 50 in June, and he'll be 50 in March. So we looking at things, and we have 28 years together as
Mm-hmm.
friends,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we're identifying what being lonely looks like in the pursuit of your goals. And he
Mm-hmm.
sent me this clip that spoke to um, a little bit about inspiration and motivation, but the guy was basically saying that it has to come from within, because the person in front is the person that's going to take the darts. That's the person that's going to get sliced up,
Mm-hmm.
and people are waiting to see if you're going to still stand. You bleeding to death, you know moving forward on everything they agree with, but you're taking all of
The brunt
the
of everything.
everything.
I
and
can
so
relate to that.
and
I can
so
relate to
when
that.
it comes to motivation, sometimes it's hard to motivate myself based off of the inspiration that I get,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like scrolling. Like, we all see inspiration
Yeah.
scrolling. We
Yeah.
all see inspiration. I'm on YouTube University. I'm inspired all the time, but you have
Yeah.
to apply the knowledge.
Right.
And the motivation to apply the knowledge for me is necessity, because I have to do it. There's really nothing else.
Yeah.
Like, I have to do it. And sometimes it's easier than other times,
Mm-hmm.
but motivation to me is necessity. It has to be done, because if I'm not going to do it, and I've learned, in situations in life, that if you're not the person to go willing to catch the gash that need 4,800 stitches, then it just won't get done.
Right.
Because if the people won't step out and catch the arrows with you, they're not coming in front of you,
Right.
So
They'll just
someone
they'll
has
just
to,
sit and wait for the next person to be willing to take those darts and arrows.
or that part, or if somebody's out front and they got enough people following them, then everybody will follow. Like,
Yeah.
85% of the world are followers,
Yeah.
and they are allow themselves to be dictated by societal norms or influence.
Yeah.
And 10% of those people, 10% of the people run those influences, or run that world where it influences those 85.
Yeah.
And then there's 5% that understand both sides and realize that there's a higher frequency that you have to operate on to motivate and inspire yourself to get through this other stuff.
Yeah.
So motivation to me is necessity. It has to be done.
Right.
And again, some days it's easier than others.
So being a seasoned artist, and right now the motivation is necessity, has it always been that way throughout your entire career, or has it changed and shifted?
I believe it's probably more of that now as you
Mm-hmm.
get older. As I get older, I mean, motivation. I lived 20 years in Atlanta. My motivation was, you know, shit. These other five artists, they just did five art shows,
Yeah.
and it motivates me to be in the sixth, seventh, and eighth one.
Yeah.
Um, so you know, the thing with, again, choosing isolation to fix yourself, to better understand yourself, to to remove people who find or see conflict in what you do, and allowing the people who don't to reside. Being in that space is different for me than it was like 20 years ago,
Yeah.
or whatever, because the motivation was still that it had to get done. Like, I'm part of a movement, if you will, called City of Ink out of Atlanta, Georgia. It's a black-owned tattoo shop and art gallery that was
Yeah.
started. I'm a co-founder of 2007,
Oh, I
and
didn't know you were a co-founder. I'm
yeah,
familiar with City of Ink.
yeah, I did the
Okay.
logo. Maya did my whole arm. Maya is the person that I talked to that I was
Yeah.
mentioning.
Okay.
So we have a very, very, very deep relationship, and I was a part of building that, bringing my energy and my skill set to that for what we just celebrated this past February. 17 years we've been having an art show yearly to celebrate that success.
Yeah.
And so in that time, as City of Ink was being built, it was a necessity. But what motivated us was that as people came to the space, it inspired them. So it motivated us to do more.
Yeah.
And that turned into 17 years. So this is an experience that I have that it's a formula. It's not
Yeah.
really rocket science, but you have to have willing participants. You have to have people who are willing to be led. You have to have people who are willing to lead. Um, you have to have all of these different elements for that to manifest. And so that was the motivation, is finding other ways to keep these people coming in, keep them satisfied, and seeing how this builds to a collective artistic ecosystem. That was the motivation. Whereas now, I don't have the patience that I had then.
Yeah.
I have way more experience to not need the patience,
Right.
because my gift to a person or artist is that, you know you could take the 30 years, or we can chop that in half, and maybe in half again, because I've already done that, and
Right.
I understand what that contract is saying,
Yeah.
because I've been burned before, or
Right.
I understand what this proposal will do because I've gotten money from it.
Right.
But if you want to take those 30 years, I find that people like to take 30 years here. And I also learned for myself, in consulting with people and confiding in people, that I have to realize that I am special, and I don't place myself on that level. So I'm having the expectation of people to move like I move, think like I think, but the experiences say different. You
Exactly.
can't take the experiences. And because of that, I had to be told that, hey dude, like, some people don't have what you have.
Right.
And I'm like, well, what do I have? And when I think about it, it's these experiences. Like I got into a debate or argument with somebody about something menial, and we were talking about documenting something, and she was like on my case, and I'm just like, I'm thinking, like, you don't even have no documentaries out. Like, you're not even in any
Right.
documentaries.
Exactly.
I'm in about, I can pull up 5 or 6 links on YouTube right now
Right.
where, as part of what we did, we documented our history. I
Yeah.
can show you the story of us going to Art Basel in 2013 and
Yeah.
what happened. Like, I can show you the documentary I did for the wall we did for Art Beats and Lyrics that my friend William Phoenix Jr. shot.
Right.
So I have to remember that my experience, not my arrogance, not my attitude,
Right.
my experience is what makes me different.
Yeah.
And my experience is what separates me from everybody. And my experience is also what I have to use to develop a better sense of patience, right? And understanding that I'm not on the same level of people. That has
Right.
nothing to do with arrogance or anything. It's the experience definitely says that if I have been in 5 documentaries, produced 2 or 3 myself, that I have a little more experience about the value of that, how it should be done, how, not to say that I'm not open to ideas,
Right.
but you can't tell me what to do.
Exactly. The reason that I enjoy having conversations, especially having conversations with someone like yourself, is because it answers a lot of questions. When, let's go back to, you're talking about being alone or being in solitude, and being someone that's a creative and having the right people around you. and sometimes your experiences make you question things. And so I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, because I had to have the conversation with myself, and I was expecting myself and others. Then I had to tell myself, like, but you're not others. They don't
That's right.
have the same experience that you have,
That means
and
a
you
lot.
can't expect. And I also had to tell myself, like, it's okay to know that you're great. And that doesn't make you arrogant. Like, you just have to realize that. And
Yeah,
that's something that I used to struggle with.
I did. I do too. I
You know what
do.
I mean? And I'm still working through that. So just hearing you talk about all these things, and it's inspiring for me. Like, it's real, it's answering some things that I've been working through for myself.
Well, I can say that because I went to Atlanta. I had no experiences. I had some projects that I worked on, but I ain't had nothing. I ain't really have really
Yeah.
nothing major.
Yeah.
I had a determination. I had desire. I had skill. I had talent. I had God, and that opened a bunch of doors for me over those 20 years. I came back home with all that experience, and it's been hell for me. Like,
Mm.
I have had more confrontations and issues with people than I've ever had in my life. And so part of that is me, I'm owning all of it,
Yeah.
right? I'm going, for everybody, I'm going to own all of it, right? Because it has everything to do with my experience. I have a
Yeah.
higher capacity of expectation.
Same.
But I also have to realize what one of my ex-girlfriends told me. Um, they not like you. And she was only speaking to the fact that I had spent enough time with her for her to learn experiences that were different for her.
Yeah.
That, like, you have to develop patience with these people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not patient,
Okay.
as I get older, but
Yeah.
I'm learning by being in solitude and by understanding and learning what it is to be patient
Yeah.
for my with myself
Yeah.
first.
Mm-hmm.
That that's the thing that I will own,
Yeah.
but I will not own being at the same level of people because
Right.
my experience is like for example, I would never get on. I cook, right?
Okay.
I would never get on a panel of chefs,
Right.
right? I take pictures with my iPhone. I would never apply for a photography grant.
Mm-hmm.
I see that happening in Cleveland. You got
Yeah.
people who cook, who on chef panels or talking chef language. And it's
See,
like,
we need to have a second conversation, because you're saying a lot of things that I see and peep, and then I just keep it to myself, because and
well, that's
and
why
I've
people
had
don't
to
like me.
work through my I I I have had to have these conversations with myself and just not get angry about things, because I have gone to events in Cleveland for Cleveland, and the panelists are talking about things where I'm like, why am I here? I have more experience than everyone that they chose to be on this panel to represent Cleveland.
But Cleveland is based off of Cleveland's infrastructure and ecosystem is based off of false relationships.
Yes,
It's
because then
based
I
off
see
of
people
proximity.
going to these people as like the experts, and you're in the audience, so they just automatically just dismiss you, like, oh, you were in the audience, so there's no way. And I'm like,
Again, I have a bar. So the bar for me, if I just use City of Ink,
yeah.
right? That's a bar for me
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't just conversation. Now, people would say City of Ink was clicky
Yeah.
and whatever, whatever, but people can't say that City of Ink didn't inspire the whole city to do what it's doing now with
Yeah.
art galleries. In 2004, 5, and 6, when we were building up to what City of Ink became, there were no art galleries. Contrary to the popular belief, there were no art galleries for young Black urban artists. There
Right.
was one outlet, Art Beats and Lyrics, that my friends W and Jabari, that they still do to this day,
Mm-hmm.
sponsored by Jack Daniels. They toured the country with it. That was the only vehicle for Black urban art.
Mm-hmm.
So when City of It was born, it grew. It grew because people gave water to plants.
Exactly.
If you don't water the plants, then shit ain't gonna grow.
It's gonna wither.
So people, I believe, get to a point here where they feel like, well, instead of watering this plant, I'm going to grow my own plant. But this plant is up here already,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And so it's the going back to what I said. It's like, well, the inability to for us to work in cohesion, you know. And it's not just art; it's Cleveland.
It's
It's
Cleveland.
the grassroots community. I've
Mm-hmm.
heard it in that community. I've heard it, in the in all different aspects of what Cleveland represents.
Yeah.
But again, like for myself, I had to realize that um, I had to stop speaking to these narratives because these aren't my experiences. My
Right.
experiences are different. So when I'm in a room, I'm respectful of the chef, even though I can cook.
Mm-hmm.
I'm respectful of the photographer, even though I take a great picture with my iPhone. I'm
Same.
not looking to benefit from what someone is a master of
Mm-hmm.
by posing as that thing
Same. Same.
for a picture photo op, for a grant, for an opportunity, for a relationship. I got a relationship with a prestigious studio for almost 30 years, and
Right.
I didn't have to do nothing but be me
Right.
for that. So I have to figure out a different way of being me here
Mm-hmm.
that allows myself to build better relationships,
Yeah.
because, all I got is what I know and my experiences and a track record of people who co-sign like, okay, you've done these things or you
Right.
represent these things.
So, in moving and maneuvering through different cultures and circles, how did you develop your artistic style?
So I was reared by what Cleveland will know as the graffiti sensei of the time at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a guy named Sano, and
Sano, okay.
so I met Sano officially in '88 when I
Mm-hmm.
got to John Marshall as a freshman. But I knew Sano through his work and the work of Doing Everything Funky, which was Cleveland's, prestigious graffiti crew at the time, through the Red Line and Downtown Records and certain places where we would catch his tags or whatnot. Ended up meeting Sano in '88, and he took myself and another friend at the time under the wing, and that relationship is valid to this day.
Yeah.
That is the person who taught me how to really be an artist, because this was the person that was advanced.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about leadership, right? We cut school to go to Sano's house for the leadership.
Right.
We liberated spray paint art supplies for the leadership. We
Right.
sacrificed our freedom stealing shit for the leadership, right? That's how sincere and serious we were about the leadership,
Mm-hmm.
and it was whatever we had to do to be up under this person, because this
Right.
person has the tool set, the mindset, and the patience that we need. And so I would attribute my style initially to Sano, you know, um, or my understanding of art. And then also comic books, cartoon characters. Flash forward to maybe fourth or fifth grade, hip hop culture is blooming, and so New York graffiti culture was probably my greatest influence.
Yeah.
This is before I met Sano, though. So when I met Sano, it's like all of this coming to full circle.
Yeah.
And then yeah, and then from that, I just adopted and adapted to all the things, different artistic principles,
Mm.
practices that I like: graphic design, tattoo culture, illustration, fine art, photography. All of these things I converge into this style of mine, and it's to invoke some type of spiritual um, um, response from you in terms of how I utilize the colors,
Yeah.
or the what I'm communicating, or the movement within it.
So, what would you, or what advice would you give emerging artists on how to develop their own personal artistic style?
Study other artists. Nothing is new under the sun. Study other artists to learn how to borrow what's already
Mm-hmm.
been done, and shape it into something that's your own. That's what
Mm-hmm.
every artist does. No artist that's out right now is doing anything that's new, except these people that's like, doing this weirdo type shit, um, to push the envelope of what art is. And that's
Yeah.
a debate, because art is subjective,
Is
but
yeah.
based off of the purest fundamentalist approach to what most people identify as art. Study other artists, you
Okay.
know, study and study and study and develop your own style around those studies.
So you've given us your motivation and your inspiration. You talked about your artistic style. What do you define as success? Or
Mm.
how do you define success?
I just said this on Threads a couple of days ago. Let's see if I can remember. I spoke to this specifically. Excuse me. Success to me is I'm paraphrasing.
Mm-hmm.
Success, one of the forms of how I measure success is the ability to take whatever your gift or talent is and that allow for provide that providing opportunities for other people. So success is being to me is being able to feed other people off of your talent and your skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Success is having an idea and executing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, success is defying the odds and manifesting the thing that people will only dream about. Success is having relationships that's 30 years old that you have never had any confrontations, any doubts, any questions about the nature of what these people represent for you. That's
Yeah.
successful because family blood don't last 30 years. So
Right.
relationships, having healthy relationships that last, is success to me. And being an inspiration that triggers change is a success. Like Tupac said that he may not be the person to change the world, but he will spark the mind of the person who will.
Yeah.
And I can say that he's manifested that. So that's my goal to do the same. And that's success.
I love that. That's a great answer. So, speaking of success, you somehow find time to run brands. So, you have Angels and Crown and Inspire Your City,
Right. Yeah.
along with being
That's
the
funny.
multifaceted artist that you are. So, tell us about Angels and Crowns and Inspire Your City, like briefly.
Briefly, it
Yeah.
is a person doing too damn much. It is ideas
Mm-hmm.
that I'm in the front lines getting slaughtered to manifest,
Yeah.
basically. So let's take Angels and Crowns is is a vehicle for me to produce products.
Okay.
You know, so I have a store. That's where I sell my prints.
Mm-hmm.
I sell merch. When I do merch, handmade merch mostly. And that's my vehicle to do that because I've always wanted to own and push a brand.
Yeah.
Um, so, I won't say that it's on life support, but it's like one of the things that I haven't been able to give the proper amount of attention.
Mm-hmm.
But I can say that I have it because
Right.
I've been in so many conversations with people who talk about making T-shirts and doing this. They don't have an online store.
Right.
They don't have a brand.
Right.
So I got that. Inspire Your City is a little deeper and a more personal and something that I am every day finding ways to continue to breathe life into because Inspire Your City has absolutely nothing to do with me.
Mm-hmm.
The term was coined by my friend Maya Bailey
Mm-hmm.
as a mantra and mission and challenge to everybody that was around us at the time. Use your art to inspire your city. Use your
Right.
artistic hustle to inspire the city. That's what art is supposed to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in doing that, when I came back home, you know, I didn't have anything to land in. There was nothing to catch me.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I had to start from scratch. I didn't have anybody who said, "Hey, here's some opportunities that we can bring you into," or "Hey, I got this going on you can be a part of." Like there was none of that. So
Right.
I had to figure it out. And so I did a mural for a guy, and he referred me to the executive director of Union Miles, and that was my first mural I did there, computer lab.
Mm-hmm.
And during the process of that, I started to formulate how I can turn this into a campaign because at this moment, I'm learning that there's grant money to do art. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what that is 20 years in Atlanta, but I
Right.
also know that I for 20 years, I did business to business relationships. So I know
Mm-hmm.
how to sell myself as an artist.
Yeah.
And so Inspire Your City became a thing that I said I can use this because that's ultimately what my goal here is. Like, I need inspiration. So
Yeah.
let me use my inspiration to inspire to maybe get that back in return.
Yeah.
And so I came up with a mission statement, and then that just turned into more murals and more murals. And so ultimately, it led me to a situation where I was able to receive sizable grants that allowed me to cut out the middleman.
Mm-hmm.
You know, part of sidebar, part of why City of Ink existed is under the ideology is that as artists, we have the ability to control our own destiny.
Right.
And in that, you don't need a lot of middlemen involved in facilitating those processes. So when I came home, I was like, okay, this organization facilitates all of the murals for, I know how to do what they do. I don't
Right.
need them to do that for me.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I find ways to get these projects without having to go through this medium? Even though I still worked through, you know, the organization and was able to do projects with them. So that led me to, you know, landing a sizable grant for Inspire Your City for me to do my own body of work.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I learned a lot. I failed a lot. But I did it.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm glad that you asked me those questions because it speaks to my struggle in living in Cleveland as a visionary, not just an artist. Now we're
Yeah.
talking a different level. A visionary who has a multitude of ideas that I have manifested. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that, you know, a lot of people are dreamers,
Right.
or even better, I have another word, people romanticize the concept of doing certain things that
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the desire to sacrifice for.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to the earlier part of the conversation, you know, I have a relationship with Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., whose father was assassinated at 21 years old because of what he dedicated to he sacrificed to his community.
Yeah.
And because I have that relationship with his son who's living in his father's shoes, I feel like as a visionary, I have to see things through.
Yeah.
You know, even though you don't have infrastructure, even though you don't have, you know, a real front line, even
Right.
though you don't have all the ideas, I mean, all the answers, even though you don't have everything, it still is necessary. So, as an artist, as a visionary who's an artist, it's necessary to manifest these things.
Right.
So, it's necessary to manifest an outlet for me to push out artistic prints, to push out T-shirts with things that I want on them. It was necessary to create a brand around it so that it looked for real. It wasn't just, you know, the Gildan T-shirt
Yeah.
with a print on it. Like I pressed my own tags on them and
Mm-hmm.
everything. Um, Inspire Your City was necessary because I myself needed the inspiration. And at the time, what triggered the concept behind my grant proposal was that Cleveland functions at a 66% illiteracy rate.
Mm-hmm.
So as an artist, I saw that this is a way to activate a conversation around this. This is like how the fuck I'm sorry.
That's fine. No, it's
How
fine.
how how the fuck like
Yeah.
66 and in some neighborhoods 90 to 95%.
Yeah.
So um all of that ties back as I'm speaking through it, you know, is identifying with being something that's these projects, these brands are byproducts of being a visionary,
Yeah.
having ideas that I have that are necessary for me to manifest. Because when we talked about that grief,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have other outlets,
Yeah.
you know, for the most part, other than certain people I can talk to and the manifestation of creative thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
So that's why. But again, going back, it's me doing too much. It's being hopeful and optimistic that somebody will help water this plant,
Yeah.
you know. But a lot of times people just want to grow their own plant. And I
Absolutely.
understand that, and
Yes.
that's fair. But I can say that in a lot of scenarios, many scenarios, I haven't seen those plants grow.
Right. Well, you're here today. You might have somebody who can help those plants grow, especially for your line.
Okay.
We'll talk about that off camera. But uh,
Righteous.
um, what can we do to support you as a creative? What can we do to support Inspire Your City and Angels and Crowns?
What you can do is you've done it already. You're providing an outlet for me to share you know, a
But we also,
conversation
as the
about.
audience, what can the audience do?
The audience can go to shop.angelsandcrowns.com and buy some prints.
Yeah.
The audience can go to at Mr. Soul, MisterSoul 216. Just scroll through the feed and like some pictures. You
Yes.
know, it don't cost nothing to do
And
that.
share.
And
Like
share.
and
Just
share.
share the content.
Exactly.
Because the content is created by an individual who can say he stands on his principles, and that even yourself said embodies the name,
Mr.
you know, that
Soul.
are done in the work and the actions and my intent. So,
Absolutely.
but for yourself, I always revere people who provide forums for people to speak and engage in dialogue. I definitely feel like this was therapeutic for me
Ah,
because a lot of times I don't talk to people. I
yeah.
don't share experiences for some of the reasons because I used to share them and I started to feel certain energies
Mm.
that like you would think people be excited about
No.
certain
I
things.
can relate.
And so I realized that I just don't share a lot.
Yeah.
So even aspects of this conversation, I've touched on things that I don't haven't like really said.
Yeah.
So, you know, I appreciate the opportunity to invite to be able to
Yeah.
have the dialogue.
I
That
appreciate you
support.
for coming.
Oh,
I
no doubt.
appreciate you for having this conversation with me and even being open and transparent to talk about some things that you haven't shared before. And that is one of the reasons that I am very, um, for lack of a better word, I'm very picky about who I have conversations with.
I can see that.
Uh, I'm very picky about the conversations because I am, I just, the conversations that I like to have and the people that I like to have in my space, um, they don't always have to be a reflection of who I am in the moment, but they have to have or embody something that I admire and something that I think my audience needs to hear and to view. And so I take it very serious what I put out into the world. So I don't think that many people take that serious. So that's why I'm really picky about who I sit down and invite in my space.
Well, I spoke to you speaking to the same thing that I said a couple of times. It's frequency. It
Yeah.
has to match, but preferably be above and beyond because
Yeah.
that's where learning and growth is for myself.
Yes.
Sometimes people who match your frequency, they matching it not to help you elevate, but
Right.
to make sure that they're close enough to know what
Yeah.
you're doing or how you're doing it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we live in a society where people will take advantage of situations like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't have control over that. All
Right.
we have control over is knowing that at bare minimum the bar has to match
Yeah.
and it has to be higher
Mm-hmm.
because that's what your audience deserves. That's what
Yeah.
you want to provide.
Yeah.
That's your outlook. That's your vision.
Yeah.
So that's what we all hope to attract.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because sometimes I find myself in circles where, we talked about this earlier, where I know more than everybody, and that tends to get boring. I don't want to always be around people that I know more than, or I'm always the person that everyone is looking to have all the answers. Sometimes I want to be in conversation where I can learn something too, and where I can be motivated as well, and not always have to be the motivatee.
So that's where I'm at
Or the
now.
motivator.
That's where I'm at in my life right now. And I started to come into this space in March 31st this year because June 7th I did my first solo art show ever in life
Mm-hmm.
in Atlanta, and it was a goal of mine to do before I turned 50.
Mm-hmm.
But in that process, I I isolated myself and I only allowed the things and people that attracted themselves to me during that place to be what influenced me after that point.
Yeah.
And so, you know, um, I in that space I realized how valuable it was to be in isolation to better learn how to process these things that I think about, process my experience here, how to better my experiences
Mm-hmm.
here,
Mm-hmm.
how to have better strategies with dealing with people, and how to be more patient and all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
But
That's where I am now. I'm at the end of my isolation period, but I'm still in the midst of it. Like I really haven't been going to like events and things and
well, I don't go
yeah.
out much because like it's it's a redundant experience for
Yes.
me, and
Same.
I just like I'm a thrill seeker in terms of like visionaries or thrill seekers. Like, how can I manifest these 4 brands at the same time? Like,
Okay, so it's not just me that does that. Me, I do, I do that.
But
You see, I have my merches out like and you see it says "Dream Big Dreams," and I purposely put that there because this has been my merch line for a very long time, and I have a front door, but I usually come through the back door, and I have to pass this every day to look to look at it and say, did you post about your merch today? Did you sell at least one product today? Like, what it,
I get caught up because even though I have all of those things that you mentioned, I'm a creator.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I don't really care to be around people like that. And because, the when I say that the experience, and I mostly only go to a lot of art stuff.
Yeah.
At the time, that's what I was doing. But I'll use a conversation with a young artist I had last month where she expressed to me that, well, I was expressing to her why I don't go out.
Yeah.
Why I don't go to certain things. And it has everything to do with, you know, frequency and politics. And when I expressed to her what my reasoning was, she expressed that she felt the same way in some capacity and that she was around people who were having the same types of conversations.
Yeah.
And I pushed back. I said, well, we can't be having the same conversations because when I scroll on Instagram, I see people in spaces and places that are opposition to what I deem is necessary. Right? I can't tell nobody where to go.
Right.
But I have my experiences. I know where going certain places ain't gonna go nowhere.
Right.
And I've seen it, and it don't take me long to pick on being here 3, 4, 5 years. Oh, this is how this shit work. Okay, this is how I'm gonna pivot.
Same.
And I don't need to be here, here, and here, especially if I'm not there and I'm hearing the same conversations that I was hearing that first 1, 2.5 years I was engaged in the politics of it. So to me, it says that somebody is not having a conversation in a public forum. Somebody is not pushing forward with the need to force a pivot.
Right.
And I relinquish my desire to do that because, of my own personal reasons and personal experiences in doing that already.
Yeah.
So I sit back and observe, and in that solitude, I create around what I want to attract.
Yeah.
And I found that has given me more life here than feeling like I'm obligated to be in these spaces, be part of these conversations, show up at these functions, because there's something deeper wrong if we're doing all this and artists are still having the same conversations about struggling, not being respected by the system and all this type of stuff.
Right.
So I find it very important for me to tap into my own personal mantras. Like, you have this set up for yourself when you come in. When I turn on my computer, I see Inspire Your City.
Yeah.
So I'm charged with a task every morning that I wake up, and I just try to live by that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I say a lot.
So in closing, what's next for Mr. Soul? I know one thing that's coming up at the Rock Hall for the A Tribe Called Quest tribute, which I figured you weren't gonna mention. You probably forgot about because you got so many things.
I could talk about so much, but I have a lot of experiences. But so I ran into Arnold Hines, who's known for doing a lot of functions and events here in Cleveland. And backstory, my mentor Sano used to design flyers for Arnold back in the 90s when Arnold was doing his thing. That's why I respect Arnold, because when I left Cleveland, he was doing that. When I came back, he was doing that at a higher level.
Yes. It's so elevated
it's
now.
Elevated.
Yeah.
It's not complacent.
No.
The same.
No.
So I ran into him at an art function, where I had a piece displaying played. He liked the piece. It was already sold,
Mm-hmm.
and we just exchanged information. And he reached out to me, asked if I was interested. And I don't accept a lot of things,
Yeah.
but I wanted to honor that because I respect what he's done over the years that I haven't been here.
Yeah.
And I'm a Tribe Called Quest fan. I grew up on Tribe Called Quest. We used to walk to the H&B discount to get the cassette tape.
You was on
The
your award
cassette
tour.
tape. Right, exactly. So that is in October. Um, I'll be doing a live painting
Yeah.
centered around Tribe Called Quest theme. Like I said, I did a solo art show in June in Atlanta that was successful, and for 2 months I isolated myself to create about 23 pieces of work.
Wow.
And I ended up displaying 20, but in that time frame, I realized that this is the space that I need to be in to deal with things. And so that's all I'm really working on now is just personal stuff, exploring other creative outlets. Like I said, the animation, I have a personal project in mind with that. But other than that, playing the game of being an artist,
Yeah.
and I won't list projects. I'm at a point where projects are projects because I have to do those to by necessity. But I do have those personal brands, and I'm doing something with each one of them, myself included, and just staying creative. That's what it is.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for sitting down and having this conversation and sharing with us and sharing with me. I really appreciate it. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, indeed, because there's always a part 2, 3, 4. I could talk to you another hour about a whole different subject line.
Yeah.
As it pertains to the experience. But for the time that I was given, I do appreciate the outlet to be able to speak. Well appreciated.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
All right.